When Clara Washington's trembling fingers sealed the envelope containing her response to a mail-order bride advertisement in 1867 Texas, she knew the color of her skin would shock the rancher, who had been charmed by her words alone. But James Mitchell's reaction, when she stepped off that dusty stagecoach, would surprise everyone, including Clara herself. What happens when a man's heart proves stronger than society's hatred? The needle slipped from Clara Washington's fingers, drawing blood that stained the white fabric she was mending. In the flickering candlelight of her tiny room above Baker's Bakery, she stared at the crimson drop, as if it held all the answers she desperately needed. The autumn wind of 1867 rattled the windows of Amarillo, Texas, while Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Tonight, she would either write the most important letter of her life or continue living in the shadows of other people's dreams. Clara wiped her finger on her apron and picked up the newspaper she had bought with her last spare penny. The marriage advertisement seemed to glow on the page like a beacon. Seeking a God-fearing woman of good character for marriage. Must be willing to relocate to cattle ranch outside Laredo. Serious inquiries only. Write to James Mitchell, care of Laredo Post Office. Her dark eyes traced each word again, memorizing the careful penmanship that suggested education and patience. At 24, Clara had watched countless opportunities slip away like morning mist, each rejection a fresh wound that reminded her of the world she lived in. But this letter represented something different, a chance to be judged by her words before her appearance, her character before her color. The wooden floor creaked beneath her bare feet as she paced the small space. Her room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and the small table where she worked on her sewing. But it was hers, bought with coins earned one careful stitch at a time. She had fled Louisiana 2 years ago, leaving behind the charred remains of everything she had known. The war had ended, but freedom felt like a word without meaning, when doors remained closed and opportunities vanished like smoke. Clara sat at her table and pulled out a sheet of precious paper. Each word would cost her dearly, but she had to try. She dipped her pen in ink and began to write, her hand steady despite the trembling in her chest. "Dear Mr. Mitchell," she began, "I read your advertisement in the Amarillo Daily News and find myself compelled to respond. I am 24 years old, a woman of faith who believes in the dignity of honest work. I can read and write, having been taught by my mother who valued education above all else. I am skilled with needle and thread, can tend a garden, and am not afraid of hard work." She paused, considering her next words carefully. How much truth could she reveal? How much would destroy her chances before they began? "I was born in Louisiana but came to Texas seeking new opportunities after the war. I have supported myself through sewing and mending, and I believe a woman's worth is measured by her actions, not her circumstances. I am seeking a partner who values kindness, honesty, and mutual respect. If you believe these qualities matter more than appearance or social standing, I would be honored to hear from you." Clara signed her name with a flourish, sealed the letter, and held it against her chest. Tomorrow, she would face the gauntlet of the post office, where Mr. Hutchins would peer at her with his pale, judgmental eyes. But tonight, she allowed herself to dream of a different life. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Clara's mood as she descended the narrow stairs to the bakery. Mrs. Muller, the baker's wife, barely looked up from her bread dough as Clara passed through the kitchen. "Post office opens at 8, Mrs. Muller said without warmth. "Don't be late for your sewing circle appointment with Mrs. Henderson." Clara nodded, wrapping her threadbare shawl around her shoulders. The streets of Amarillo were already bustling with activity ranchers heading to the cattle yards, merchants opening their shops, children running to school. Clara walked among them but felt separate, as if she moved through a world that existed parallel to theirs but never quite touched. The post office occupied a corner of Hutchins' general store, its wooden floors worn smooth by countless boots. Mr. Hutchins stood behind the counter, his weathered face creased with suspicion as Clara approached. She had dealt with his type before, men who measured her worth by the darkness of her skin rather than the content of her character. "Morning, Mr. Hutchins," Clara said, placing the letter on the counter. "I need to mail this to Laredo." Hutchins picked up the letter, examining the address with exaggerated care. Laredo, eh? That's a long way from here. You sure you got the right address? I'm sure, Clara replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. That'll be 2 cents for the postage, Hutchins muttered, not meeting her eyes. Clara placed the coins on the counter with quiet dignity, each cent representing hours of careful work. The metallic clink seemed to echo through the store, sealing her fate with its finality. Mail goes out on the noon stage, Hutchins said, tossing the letter into a canvas bag. Can't guarantee when it'll get there, though. Roads ain't what they used to be. Clara turned to leave, but Hutchins' voice stopped her. You know, Miss Washington, some folks might wonder why a woman like you would be writing to strangers in Laredo. Might give people the wrong idea about your intentions. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. My intentions are my own business, Mr. Hutchins, she said, meeting his eyes for the first time, just as yours are yours. She walked out of the store with her head held high, but her heart pounded with the weight of what she had set in motion. Behind her, she heard the whispers starting, the same whispers that had followed her since she arrived in Amarillo, but this time, she didn't care. She had taken the first step toward a different life. The rest of the day passed in a blur of needle and thread. Clara worked on Mrs. Henderson's dining room curtains, her fingers moving automatically while her mind wandered to Laredo. What kind of man was James Mitchell? What did his ranch look like? Would he be kind? Or would he be like so many others who judged her before they knew her? That evening, Clara climbed the stairs to her room and lit her candle. She pulled out her mother's Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. Inside the front cover, pressed between the pages, was a small photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Her mother, Rose, stood beside her father, Samuel, both of them dressed in their finest clothes. They looked so young, so full of hope. Clara traced her mother's face with her fingertip, remembering the lessons she had learned at her knee. Beauty comes from within, child, her mother had always said, and love finds a way, even when the world says it can't. As Clara prepared for bed, she whispered a prayer into the darkness. She prayed for courage, for wisdom, and for the strength to face whatever came next. Somewhere in Laredo, a man named James Mitchell would soon hold her letter in his hands. Whether he would see past her careful words to the hope beneath, only time would tell. But for the first time in months, Clara Washington fell asleep with a smile on her face. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, like a gift from heaven, its crisp white paper standing out among the usual bills and notices that cluttered Mr. Hutchins' mail counter. Clara's name was written in the same careful script she remembered from the advertisement, and her hands shook as she held it up to the light streaming through the store's dusty windows. 3 weeks had passed since she mailed her letter. 3 weeks of wondering and waiting and trying not to hope too much. Well, I'll be, Hutchins muttered, peering over his spectacles. Looks like someone actually wrote you back. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she carefully broke the wax seal. The letter was brief but warm, and each word seemed to glow on the page. Dear Miss Washington, your letter touched my heart in ways I did not expect. Your words reveal a spirit I greatly admire, one of strength, faith, and honest purpose. I would be honored to meet you in person. The enclosed funds should cover your passage to Laredo. If we find ourselves compatible, we shall proceed with joy. If not, I will ensure your safe return to Amarillo with no questions asked. I look forward to our meeting with great anticipation. Respectfully yours, James Mitchell. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the $20 bill tucked inside the envelope. The money felt heavier than gold, representing more than just travel expense. It was proof that someone, somewhere, believed she was worth the investment. Sweet Jesus, Hutchins whispered, his voice carrying across the store. Someone actually sent her money. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the store like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, looked up from her shopping with sharp interest. Old Pete, who spent his days whittling on the store's front porch, craned his neck to see what was happening. Even young Tommy Murphy, who usually ignored everyone while he swept the floors, stopped his work to stare. Clara felt their eyes burning into her back as she folded the letter carefully, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She had been honest in her correspondence about her background, her skills, her hopes, but she had carefully omitted the one detail that mattered most in their world. James Mitchell had fallen in love with her words, her character, her dreams, but would he still feel the same when he saw her face? Mrs. Patterson sidled closer with false sweetness, her silk dress rustling like snake scales. "My dear Clara, surely you don't intend to deceive this poor man. When he discovers what you are—" "I am exactly what I claim to be," Clara interrupted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "A woman of good character, seeking an honest life." "But Clara, dear," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "you know how these things work. Men have expectations. When he sees you, he'll know immediately that you've been dishonest." Clara lifted her chin, meeting Mrs. Patterson's cold blue eyes. "I have been nothing but honest about who I am. If Mr. Mitchell judges me by anything other than my character, then he is not the man I believed him to be." The store fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Clara could feel the weight of their judgment, the same crushing force that had followed her since childhood. But this time, something was different. This time, she had proof that someone saw value in her words, her thoughts, her dreams. "Well, I never," Mrs. Patterson huffed, her face flushing red. The audacity of some people. Clara walked toward the door, her spine straight and her head high. But as she reached for the handle, Hutchins' voice stopped her. "You know, Miss Washington, that stagecoach ride to Laredo ain't exactly safe for a woman traveling alone. Especially not for, well, you know what I mean." The threat was subtle but clear. Clara turned back to face him, her dark eyes flashing with determination. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Hutchins, but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." She pushed through the door and stepped into the bright morning sunshine, but she could hear the whispers following her like a swarm of angry bees. Word would spread quickly through Amarillo's tight-knit community. By evening, everyone would know that Clara Washington had received money from a stranger, that she planned to leave town, that she was somehow trying to rise above her station. Clara walked quickly to the boarding house where she rented her room, her mind already making plans. She would need to finish her current sewing projects, collect the money owed to her, and purchase supplies for the journey. Most importantly, she would need to find the courage to face whatever waited for her in Laredo. Mrs. Muller was kneading bread dough when Clara entered the kitchen, her thick arms working the mixture with practiced efficiency. She looked up as Clara passed, her pale eyes taking in the letter still clutched in Clara's hands. "Got news, did you?" Mrs. Muller asked, her German accent thick with curiosity. "I'm leaving Amarillo," Clara said simply. "I'll be out of your room by the end of the week." Mrs. Muller's hands stilled on the dough. "Leaving? Where are you going?" "Laredo. I'm getting married." The words felt strange on Clara's tongue, heavy with possibility and fear. Mrs. Muller's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "Married? To whom?" "A rancher named James Mitchell. He seems to be a good man." Mrs. Muller wiped her hands on her apron, studying Clara with new interest. "You don't know him?" "We've been corresponding. Sometimes you can know a person better through letters than through small talk." Mrs. Muller grunted, returning to her bread. "Well, I suppose stranger things have happened. You'll need to settle your account before you go." Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her heart still racing from the morning's encounter. She spread James Mitchell's letter on her small table and read it again, searching for clues about the man who had written it. His handwriting was neat and strong, suggesting education and patience. His words were kind but not overly familiar, respectful but warm. He had sent money without guarantees, trusting her to make the right choice. But what if Mrs. Patterson was right? What if Clara was deceiving him? Not through lies but through omission. What if his kindness evaporated the moment he saw her face? Clara pulled out her mother's Bible and opened it to the pressed photograph of her parents. They had faced similar challenges, finding love in a world that said their union was impossible. Her father had been a free man of color, her mother a former slave who had earned her freedom through years of service. They had built a life together despite the obstacles, raising Clara and her brother with love and dignity. "Give me strength, Mama," Clara whispered to the photograph. "Help me find the courage to follow my heart." That afternoon, Clara walked to the dress shop, where she did most of her sewing work. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, was a stern woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but she paid fairly and on time. "I need to collect what's owed to me," Clara said, placing her finished work on the counter. "I'm leaving town." Mrs. Henderson examined the garments with her usual critical eye, checking every seam and button. "Leaving? Where are you going?" "Laredo. I'm getting married." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "Married? To whom?" "A rancher. A good man, I believe." Mrs. Henderson counted out coins with practiced efficiency. "Well, I suppose I can't fault you for trying to better yourself, though I hope you know what you're getting into." Clara pocketed the money and turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson's voice stopped her. "Clara, wait. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I want you to know that your work is excellent. Whatever happens in Laredo, you have skills that will serve you well." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means more than you know." That evening, Clara sat in her room writing a letter to her brother Marcus, who worked on a farm outside Houston. She told him about James Mitchell, about the opportunity that awaited her in Laredo, about her hopes and fears. "I know this seems sudden," she wrote, "but sometimes life gives you a chance to step through a door that may never open again. I'm scared, Marcus, but I'm also excited. For the first time in years, I feel like I might have a real future." As she sealed the letter, Clara thought about the journey ahead. The stagecoach to Laredo would take 2 days, winding through miles of Texas prairie where anything could happen. She would be traveling alone, carrying all her worldly possessions in a single carpet bag, but she would also be carrying something more precious. Clara blew out her candle and lay down on her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Amarillo settling into sleep. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for the journey that would change her life forever. Somewhere in Laredo, James Mitchell was probably thinking about her letter, wondering what she looked like, imagining their first meeting. Neither of them knew that their love story would become the talk of 2 counties, that their courage would inspire some and infuriate others, that their choice to see beyond the surface would challenge everything their communities believed about love, race, and human dignity. But that night, as Clara drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of wide open spaces and a man whose heart was as big as the Texas sky. The stagecoach wheels hit a pothole so deep that Clara's teeth rattled in her skull, jolting her awake from an uneasy dream about her mother's garden back in Louisiana. Dust swirled through the cramped interior like a brown fog, coating everything in grit that tasted of Texas earth and broken promises. Clara gripped her carpetbag tighter, feeling the reassuring weight of her mother's silver thimble wrapped safely inside her spare dress. The morning sun blazed through the small window, revealing that they had been traveling for 6 hours already, and Laredo was still a full day away. "Lord have mercy," wheezed Mrs. Abernathy. The elderly woman squeezed into the seat across from Clara. Her husband, a thin man with nervous eyes, kept glancing at Clara and then looking away quickly, as if he might catch something dangerous just by meeting her gaze. Between them sat Mr. Caldwell, a traveling salesman whose initial attempts at friendly conversation had died the moment he noticed the richness of Clara's skin tone in the harsh morning light. Clara turned her attention to the window, watching the endless Texas prairie roll by like a green and brown ocean. Cattle dotted the landscape like scattered coins, tended by cowboys whose distant figures looked no bigger than toy soldiers. Somewhere out there, James Mitchell was probably working his own land, maybe thinking about the woman who would arrive tomorrow to change his life forever. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Water stop coming up," called the driver from his perch above them. 15 minutes to stretch your legs and fill your bellies." The stagecoach lurched to a halt beside a ramshackle building that served as both general store and way station. Clara climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The other passengers scattered quickly, eager to escape the awkward tension that had filled the coach since dawn. Inside the way station, a heavy-set woman with suspicious eyes served beans and cornbread to travelers. Clara approached the counter with her coins ready, but the woman's expression hardened like cooling wax. "We don't serve your kind here," the woman said flatly. Clara felt the familiar sting of rejection, but she kept her voice level. "I can pay the same as anyone else." "Don't matter what you can pay. Rules is rules." Mr. Caldwell, who had been eating at a nearby table, suddenly stood up. For a moment, Clara thought he might defend her. Instead, he walked outside without finishing his meal, leaving his coins scattered on the wooden table. Clara bought crackers and jerky from the store portion of the building, paying twice what they were worth to a clerk who handled her money like it might burn his fingers. She ate standing on the porch, watching the other passengers enjoy their hot meal through the dirty window. "That ain't right," said a voice behind her. Clara turned to see Miguel Santos, a Mexican cowboy who had been riding alongside the stagecoach as a guard. His weathered face showed genuine sympathy, and his dark eyes held no judgment. "I appreciate the kindness," Clara said quietly. "My mama always said a person's worth ain't measured by their skin." Miguel replied, leaning against the porch railing. "She'd tan my hide if she knew I sat quiet while someone went hungry." He pulled a wrapped bundle from his saddlebags and handed it to Clara. Inside was fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit feast compared to her meager crackers. "I can't take your food," Clara protested. "My wife always packs too much." Miguel lied with a gentle smile. "You'd be doing me a favor." As they climbed back into the stagecoach, Clara noticed the change in atmosphere. The other passengers had witnessed Miguel's kindness, and their discomfort had transformed into something more complex, shame perhaps, or confusion about their own behavior. The afternoon passed more quietly, with fewer hostile glances and more thoughtful silence. Clara dozed fitfully, dreaming of James Mitchell's letters and wondering what kind of man he truly was. Would he be like Miguel, seeing her humanity before her color? Or would he be like the woman at the way station, letting prejudice blind him to everything else? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the stagecoach crested a hill and revealed the town of Laredo spread out below them like a patchwork quilt. Adobe buildings hugged the banks of the Rio Grande, their flat roofs catching the last light of day. The sight took Clara's breath away, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it represented the end of one journey and the beginning of another. "Laredo!" called the driver. "Last stop." Clara's heart began to race as the coach rolled down the dusty main street. Tomorrow morning, she would meet James Mitchell face to face. Tonight, she would spend her last hours as Clara Washington, unmarried seamstress from Amarillo. By this time tomorrow, she might be Clara Mitchell, ranch wife, or she might be heading back to Amarillo with a broken heart and wounded pride. The stagecoach stopped in front of the Grand Hotel, a two-story building that looked far grander than its name suggested. Clara gathered her belongings and stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, her legs wobbly after the long journey. "Hotel's full up," announced the clerk before Clara even reached the counter. "Try the boarding house down the street." But the boarding house was also full, and so was the next one. Clara found herself standing on a dark street corner with her carpet bag, watching the windows of Laredo glow with warm lamplight that seemed meant for everyone but her. "Señorita?" Miguel appeared at her elbow, his face creased with concern. "Having trouble finding a room?" Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "My cousin Rosa runs a small inn near the river. Clean beds, good food, fair prices. She don't judge people by nothing but their character." Rosa's inn was a simple adobe building with thick walls and a welcoming courtyard. Rosa herself was a round woman with kind eyes and hands that spoke of years of hard work. She took one look at Clara's tired face and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. "Pobrecita," Rosa murmured, leading Clara to a small but spotless room. "You look ready to fall over. When did you last have a proper meal?" Within minutes, Clara found herself sitting at Rosa's kitchen table, eating the best chili she had ever tasted, while Rosa chattered in a mixture of Spanish and English. The warmth of the food and the kindness of her hostess brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Now then," Rosa said, settling into the chair across from Clara. "Miguel tells me you're here to meet a man. A good man, I hope?" "I believe so," Clara said carefully. "We've been writing letters." Rosa's eyebrows rose. "Ah, a mail-order bride. Very romantic. What's his name?" "James Mitchell. He owns a ranch outside town." Rosa's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened with recognition, and something else, surprise, perhaps even shock. "James Mitchell?" Rosa repeated slowly. "El Americano with the big spread near Cottonwood Creek? Do you know him?" Rosa studied Clara's face for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "See, I know him. He's a good man. Honest. Fair to his workers. But," she trailed off, looking troubled. "But what?" "Nothing, Nina. Just, he's never mentioned courting anyone. The whole town would know if James Mitchell was getting married." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "James Mitchell keeps to himself mostly, but news travels fast in a small town. Especially news about one of the biggest ranchers in the county taking a wife." Rosa reached across the table and patted Clara's hand. "I'm sure it's nothing. Maybe he wanted to keep it private until he was certain." But as Clara lay in bed that night, listening to the distant sound of the Rio Grande flowing toward the Gulf of Mexico, Rosa's words echoed in her mind. What if James Mitchell had changed his mind? What if he had decided that a mail-order bride was a mistake? What if he took one look at her tomorrow and decided that some mistakes were bigger than others? Clara pulled her mother's Bible from her bag and opened it to the pressed photograph of her parents. In the flickering candlelight, their faces seemed to glow with the same love and determination that had carried them through their own challenges. "Give me courage, Mama," Clara whispered into the darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, let me face it with dignity." Outside her window, Laredo settled into sleep under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the darkness, James Mitchell was probably lying in his own bed, thinking about the woman he would meet tomorrow. Neither of them knew that their first encounter would test everything they believed about love, courage, and the power of seeing beyond the surface. But Clara had come too far to turn back now. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, and she would meet it with the same strength that had carried her from Louisiana to Texas, from slavery to freedom, from despair to hope. James Mitchell stood in front of his cracked shaving mirror, running a razor over his jaw for the third time that morning, his hands shaking like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Sunlight streamed through the windows of his ranch house, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits, celebrating the most important day of his life. At 32, he had built his 1,000-acre spread from nothing but sweat, determination, and a stubborn refusal to give up when the Texas soil fought back. But today, none of that mattered as much as the woman waiting for him in Laredo. Clara Washington's letters lay spread across his kitchen table, like treasured maps to a better future. He had read each one so many times that he could recite them from memory, her words painting pictures of a woman with strength, faith, and dreams that matched his own. But as he dressed in his best shirt and pants, James felt a knot of nervousness growing in his stomach like a tumor of doubt. "Boss, you about ready?" called Miguel Santos from the front porch. "That stage from Amarillo came in last night, and if your lady's on it, she's probably wondering where you are." James grabbed his hat and stepped outside, where his horse Ranger waited saddled and ready. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of mesquite and the promise of rain. His ranch hands had gathered near the corral, pretending to work while actually waiting to see their boss ride off to meet his mail-order bride. Buck Williams, a young cowboy from Mississippi with more opinions than sense, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Still can't believe you're fixing to marry some woman you ain't never seen, boss. What if she's ugly as a mud fence?" "What if she's beautiful as a sunrise?" James replied, swinging into the saddle. "What if she's exactly what I've been looking for all my life?" The ride to Laredo took an hour, giving James plenty of time to think about what lay ahead. He had been honest in his letters about his life, his ranch, his hopes for the future. Clara had been equally honest about her background, her skills, her faith. But there was something in her words, a careful way she described herself, that made him wonder what she might have left unsaid. Not that it mattered. James had learned long ago that a person's character mattered more than their circumstances. He had hired Mexican cowboys when other ranchers refused to work with them, and his ranch was stronger for it. He had traded fairly with Indian tribes when others chose violence, and his herds grazed safely because of it. Whatever Clara Washington looked like, whatever secrets she might harbor, he was prepared to judge her by her heart, not her appearance. Laredo bustled with morning activity as James rode down Main Street. Shopkeepers swept their porches, children ran to school, and early customers filled the restaurants and saloons. James felt their eyes following him, curious about where the usually private rancher was headed so early in the day. He stopped first at the Grand Hotel, but the desk clerk shook his head. "No Miss Washington registered here, Mr. Mitchell. You might try the boarding houses." The next 3 establishments gave him the same answer, and James felt his worry growing like storm clouds on the horizon. Had Clara changed her mind? Had something happened during her journey? Had she taken one look at Laredo and decided to return to Amarillo on the next stage? "Señor Mitchell!" called a familiar voice from across the street. James turned to see Rosa Gonzalez waving at him from the doorway of her small inn. Rosa had lived in Laredo longer than anyone could remember, and she knew everyone's business almost before they knew it themselves. "Rosa, have you seen a woman named Clara Washington? She should have arrived on last night's stage." Rosa's face broke into a knowing smile. "Ah, see. Your Novia's here, safe and sound. She's having breakfast in my kitchen right now." James felt relief wash over him like a cool breeze. "Thank you, Rosa. I was starting to worry." "She's very beautiful," Rosa interrupted, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "And very nervous. Just like you." James tied Ranger to the hitching post and followed Rosa through the courtyard to her kitchen. The smell of coffee and fresh tortillas filled the air, but James barely noticed. All his attention focused on the woman sitting at Rosa's table, her back turned toward him as she gazed out the window at the river. Clara Washington was smaller than he had imagined, with graceful shoulders and dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a blue dress that had seen better days but was clean and carefully mended. There was something elegant about the way she held herself, a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength. "Miss Washington?" James said softly. Clara turned, and James felt the world shift beneath his feet. Her skin was the color of cafe with cream. Her eyes were the deepest brown he had ever seen, and her face held a beauty that took his breath away. But more than that, he saw intelligence in her gaze, kindness in her expression, and hope mixed with fear in the way she looked at him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across Rosa's kitchen, 2 people whose words had created a bridge between their hearts before their eyes ever met. James saw Clara's face change as she waited for his reaction, preparing herself for rejection or disappointment. Instead, James stepped forward and removed his hat. "Miss Washington, I'm James Mitchell. Welcome to Laredo." Clara's eyes searched his face, looking for signs of the revulsion or shock she had learned to expect. Instead, she found something that made her heart skip like a stone across water: acceptance, admiration, and perhaps even relief. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, rising from her chair with fluid grace. "Thank you for coming to meet me." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," James replied, meaning every word. Rosa beamed at both of them, her matchmaker's heart singing with satisfaction. "Well, don't just stand there like statues. Sit, drink coffee, get to know each other properly." They spent the next hour talking across Rosa's table, their conversation flowing as easily as their letters had. James told Clara about his ranch, his dreams of building something lasting in the Texas wilderness. Clara shared stories of her journey from Amarillo, her skill with needle and thread, her love of reading and learning. "I should warn you," James said finally, "that not everyone in Laredo will welcome our arrangement. Some folks have strong opinions about such things." Clara met his gaze steadily. "And what about you, Mr. Mitchell? Do you have strong opinions?" "I do," James said firmly. "I believe a person should be judged by their character, not their circumstances. I believe love can grow between people who respect each other. And I believe you and I might build something wonderful together. if you're willing to try. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at his honest words. I'm willing, Mr. Mitchell. More than willing. Then let's go see your new home, James said, standing and offering her his arm. As they walked toward the door, Rosa called after them, Vaya con Dios, mis niños. May God bless your journey together. Outside, James helped Clara into his wagon, her carpet bag stowed safely behind the seat. As they drove through Laredo's streets, Clara noticed the stares and whispers that followed Thema White Rancher and a black woman, sitting side by side as if they belonged together. They're talking about us, Clara observed quietly. Let them talk, James said, his jaw set with determination. We know who we are and what we're building. Their opinions don't change that. As they left Laredo behind and headed toward the open prairie, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years mixed with belonging. The man beside her had seen her face, heard her voice, and chosen to continue their journey together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. Tell me about your ranch, Clara said as they bounced over the rutted road. It's not much to look at yet, James admitted, but it's got good water, strong grass, and room to grow. I've got plans for a bigger house, better corrals, maybe even a garden if you're interested in growing things. I'd love a garden, Clara said, thinking of her mother's vegetables and flowers back in Louisiana. They talked easily as the miles passed, their conversation ranging from practical matters to shared dreams. James found himself stealing glances at Clara's profile, amazed at how natural it felt to have her beside him. Clara marveled at the way James listened to her ideas, treating her thoughts as valuable rather than dismissing them as foolish woman's talk. As they crested a hill, James pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between two streams. There it is, home. Clara gazed at the spread below them, a modest house surrounded by corrals, barns, and outbuildings that spoke of careful planning and hard work. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see men working near the stables. It's beautiful, she said, meaning it. It will be even more beautiful with you in it, James replied, then blushed at his own boldness. As they drove into the ranch yard, Clara noticed the workers stopping their tasks to stare. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, and at least one showed open hostility. But James seemed unconcerned, his confidence giving Clara strength. Boys, James called as he helped Clara down from the wagon. I'd like you to meet Miss Clara Washington. We'll be married as soon as the preacher can arrange it. The announcement hit the ranch hands like a thunderclap. Miguel stepped forward with a respectful nod, his face showing approval. But Buck Williams' expression darkened like a storm cloud, and Clara could practically feel his disapproval radiating across the yard. Welcome to the Mitchell Ranch, Miss Washington, Miguel said warmly. We're honored to have you here. Thank you, Clara replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I look forward to making this my home. As James showed her toward the house, Clara caught Buck Williams spitting in the dirt and muttering something under his breath that she was grateful she couldn't hear clearly. Whatever honeymoon period she and James might have enjoyed was about to end before it began. But for now, walking beside the man who had chosen her sight unseen and confirmed that choice face to face, Clara felt ready to fight for the life they could build together. The sugar bowl crashed to the kitchen floor, exploding into 1,000 white fragments that scattered across the wooden planks like fallen snow. Clara froze with the coffee pot in her hands, watching James dive under the table as rifle shots echoed across the ranch yard like thunder on a clear day. Through the window, she could see muzzle flashes from the ridge overlooking their valley, and the terrified bellowing of cattle as rustlers drove the herd toward the southern pass. Stay down, James shouted, crawling toward the gun cabinet mounted on the far wall. Miguel, Buck, get to the rifles! Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she crouched beside the overturned kitchen chairs, still clutching the coffee pot like a weapon. In the 3 weeks since she had arrived at the Mitchell Ranch, she had grown used to the daily rhythms of ranch life, the early morning feeding, the afternoon roundups, the evening discussions around the bunkhouse. But nothing had prepared her for this moment of violent chaos that shattered their peaceful breakfast like glass against stone. Outside, Miguel's voice cut through the gunfire as he rallied the ranch hands. They're taking the North Herd. At least 12 riders. Maybe more. James reached the gun cabinet and yanked it open, revealing an arsenal of rifles and pistols that spoke of a man who understood the dangers of frontier life. He tossed a Winchester to Miguel through the open window, then grabbed a Colt revolver for himself. "How many head?" James called back, checking his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Looks like maybe 50, boss. They knew exactly where to hit us." Clara watched James transform from the gentleman who had courted her with letters into a frontier rancher, ready to defend his property with lethal force. His jaw was set like granite, his eyes hard as winter ice, and his movements carried the confidence of someone who had faced such challenges before. "Buck, take Tommy and circle around to the East Ridge," James commanded. "Try to get ahead of them before they reach the river. Miguel, you and Charlie come with me. We'll hit them from behind." "What about the woman?" Buck's voice carried across the yard, heavy with disdain. James's face darkened with anger. "Miss Washington is none of your concern. Just do your job." As the men scattered to their positions, James turned back to Clara, his expression softening despite the urgency of the moment. "Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me or Miguel," he said firmly. "There's a shotgun in the bedroom closet if you need it. Do you know how to use one?" Clara nodded, thinking of the lessons her father had given her during the dangerous years after the war. "I can handle myself." James studied her face, seeing something there that seemed to reassure him. "I believe you can. We'll be back as soon as we can." He kissed her forehead quickly, a gesture both tender and desperate, then ran toward the corral where Ranger waited, saddled and ready. Clara watched through the window as James swung into the saddle with fluid grace, his rifle balanced across his lap like an extension of his body. "Be careful," she whispered, though he was already too far away to hear. The ranch yard emptied as the men rode out in pursuit of the rustlers, leaving Clara alone with the silence that follows violence, like smoke follows fire. She moved through the house systematically, checking locks and loading the shotgun with shells she found in James's desk drawer. The weight of the weapon felt familiar in her hands, bringing back memories of nights when her family had huddled in their Louisiana cabin, listening for the hoofbeats that might bring death or worse. As she positioned herself by the front window where she could watch the road, Clara's mind raced with questions that buzzed around her head like angry wasps. Who were these rustlers? How had they known exactly where to strike? And why did she have the growing suspicion that this attack was about more than just stolen cattle? The answer came sooner than she expected, in the form of dust clouds approaching from the direction of Laredo. Clara squinted through the window, counting at least 6 riders moving toward the ranch at a deliberate pace that suggested they were in no hurry to reach their destination. These weren't reinforcements coming to help, these were men who knew the ranch hands would be gone. Clara's blood turned to ice water in her veins as she recognized the lead rider. Councilman Garrett from Laredo sat his horse like a king, surveying his domain, his bulk casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the morning sunlight. Behind him rode 5 other men Clara recognized from town shopkeepers, clerks, and businessmen who had transformed themselves into something far more dangerous. They reined in their horses just outside the ranch gate, making no attempt to hide their presence or their intentions. Garrett dismounted with deliberate slowness, his movements calculated to demonstrate that he considered himself in complete control of the situation. "Mrs. Mitchell," Garrett called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized people." Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her mind racing through her options. She could try to slip out the back door and make her way to the creek bed, but they probably had the house surrounded. She could fire a warning shot, but that would only confirm her location and might provoke them to violence. Or she could face them directly, trusting in her own courage and the hope that they wouldn't harm an unarmed woman. "We're not here to hurt you," Garrett continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We just want to talk about your future here in our community." Clara made her decision. She checked the shotgun one more time, then unlatched the front door and stepped onto the porch, keeping the weapon visible but not immediately threatening. "Mr. Garrett," she said calmly, though her heart pounded like a war drum, "this is a surprise. What brings you all the way out here?" Garrett's eyes fixed on the shotgun in her hands, and his expression shifted from false friendliness to something more honest and far more dangerous. "You can put that down, Mrs. Mitchell. We're here as friends." "Friends don't usually arrive unannounced while my husband is away," Clara replied, not moving the shotgun an inch. "Ah, but that's exactly why we're here," said a thin man Clara recognized as Mr. Pettigrew from the bank. "We wanted to speak with you privately, without James getting all emotional." Clara felt anger rising in her chest like floodwater. These men had timed their visit to coincide with the Rustler attack, which meant they either had inside information or were directly involved in the planning. Either way, their presence here was no coincidence. "Say what you came to say," Clara demanded, her finger resting near the shotgun's trigger. Garrett stepped closer, his hands spread in a gesture that was probably meant to appear peaceful but only made Clara more nervous. "The thing is, Mrs. Mitchell, your marriage to James has caused quite a stir in Laredo. People are talking, businesses are being affected, and some of our more traditional citizens are threatening to take their trade elsewhere. That sounds like a problem for the businesses, not for me." "But it is your problem," Pettigrew interjected, his voice sharp with impatience. "James Mitchell is one of the biggest landowners in the county. His decisions affect all of us. And this decision, well, it's affecting us in ways we can't tolerate." Clara felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders, but this time it came with the added threat of violence. These men weren't just expressing disapproval, they were demanding action. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Leave," Garrett said simply. "Pack your things, take the next stage back to wherever you came from, and let James find himself a more suitable wife." The word suitable hung in the air like the stench of something dead and rotting. Clara had heard it before, countless times, always delivered with the same mixture of disgust and superiority that implied she was somehow less than human. "And if I refuse?" Garrett's mask of civility finally slipped completely, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "Then we'll have to consider other options. Options that might not be so gentle." Clara raised the shotgun slightly, not quite aiming but making her position clear. "Gentlemen, I suggest you leave my property immediately. When my husband returns, I'll be sure to tell him about your visit." "Your husband," sneered a voice from the back of the group, "might not be returning at all. Rustling can be dangerous work, especially when the rustlers are better armed than expected." The implication hit Clara like a physical blow. These men hadn't just timed their visit to coincide with the Rustler attack, they had arranged it. The rustlers were either working with them or for them, creating a diversion that would allow them to threaten her without interference. But more than that, they were suggesting that James might not survive the encounter, that perhaps the rustlers had been given orders that went beyond simply stealing cattle. Clara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, replacing fear with a crystalline clarity that reminded her of her mother's voice during the worst days of the war. "When evil men think they have you cornered, child, that's when you show them what strength really looks like." "Get off my land," Clara said quietly, her voice carrying across the yard with deadly precision. "Get off my land now, or I'll start shooting and let God sort out who deserves what." The men exchanged glances, suddenly unsure of themselves in the face of her absolute determination. They had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even submission. They had not expected a woman who looked ready to fight to the death for what was hers. "You're making a mistake," Garrett warned, but he was already backing toward his horse. "This isn't over." "No," Clara agreed, watching them mount up with the shotgun trained on their leader. "It isn't. But the next time you come to my home with threats, you'd better come prepared for war." As the men rode away, Clara remained on the porch until their dust clouds disappeared over the horizon. Only then did she allow herself to tremble, the full weight of what had just happened settling over her like a heavy blanket. James and his men were out there somewhere, possibly riding into a trap. She was alone on the ranch with no way to warn them and no way to call for help. And now she knew that their marriage was about to face challenges that went far beyond social disapproval. But Clara Washington Mitchell had not come this far to surrender to fear. As she went back into the house to wait for her husband's return, she began making plans of her own. The wedding bells of the tiny chapel in Laredo rang out across the plaza like a celebration of pure defiance, their bronze voices carrying Clara and James's joy to every corner of the town, whether the residents wanted to hear it or not. Clara stood at the altar in her mother's white dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame, while James held her hands as if she were made of precious crystal that might shatter if he let go. The chapel was nearly empty, just Miguel and his wife Rosa as witnesses, Father Martinez performing the ceremony, and the ghost of every person who had chosen not to attend. Do you, James Mitchell, take Clara Washington to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? James's voice rang clear and strong in the small space. I do, with all my heart. Clara felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks as Father Martinez turned to her with the same question. 3 months had passed since the Rustler attack. 3 months of facing down threats, enduring whispers, and proving that their love was stronger than the hatred surrounding them. Now, finally, they were making it official in the eyes of God and the law. I do, Clara said firmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. I do, with everything I am. As James slipped the gold band onto her finger, Clara remembered the last letter she had received from her brother Marcus in Houston. I'm proud of you, sister, he had written. Mama would be proud too. You found a man who sees your worth, and that's worth fighting for. The ceremony was simple but profound, each word carrying the weight of their shared defiance against a world that said their union was impossible. When Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Clara with gentle reverence, as if sealing a promise that went far beyond the traditional wedding vows. Outside the chapel, a small crowd had gathered not to celebrate, but to witness what they considered a spectacle. Clara felt their stares like physical weight as she and James emerged into the afternoon sunlight, but their judgment had lost its power over her. She was no longer Clara Washington, mail-order bride from Amarillo. She was Clara Mitchell, ranch wife and partner to a man who had chosen love over convention. Miguel and Rosa had prepared a small celebration at Rosa's Inn, complete with a feast that filled the courtyard with the scents of roasted meat and fresh tortillas. As they sat around the wooden table, Clara marveled at how different this felt from the wedding she had once imagined as a young girl. There were no crowds of well-wishers, no grand reception, no gifts from admiring relatives. But there was something more precious, the absolute certainty that she and James had chosen each other freely, with full knowledge of the challenges they would face. To the bride and groom, Miguel raised his glass of wine. May your love grow stronger with each passing year. And may you have many strong sons to help work the ranch, Rosa added with a meaningful look at Clara's waist. Clara blushed at the implication, though she and James had already talked about their hopes for children. They both wanted a family, but they also knew that any children they had would face even greater challenges than they themselves had endured. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, James and Clara prepared to return to the ranch. But as they loaded Clara's few remaining possessions into the wagon, a commotion from the main street caught their attention. A crowd was gathering near the hotel, voices raised in excitement and anger. James frowned, recognizing the tone of a mob beginning to form. "Stay here," he told Clara, but she was already climbing down from the wagon. "We face things together now," she reminded him. "That's what marriage means." They made their way toward the crowd, Clara's wedding dress drawing stares and whispers as they pushed through the gathered people. At the center of the commotion stood Sheriff Dalton, a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes who had always treated James fairly in their business dealings. "What's the trouble, Sheriff?" James called out. Dalton looked relieved to see him. "James, good. I was about to send word to your ranch. We caught the rustlers who hit you 3 months back." Clara felt James tense beside her as Dalton continued. "Turns out they weren't working alone. Had inside help from some prominent citizens who thought they could pressure you into making different choices about your personal life." The crowd murmured with surprise and anger, though Clara couldn't tell if they were angry about the rustling or angry that the plan had been discovered. Dalton held up his hand for silence. Councilman Garrett, Banker Pettigrew, and 3 others are under arrest for conspiracy to commit theft and for making terroristic threats against law-abiding citizens. Clara gasped, remembering the visit from those very men while James was chasing the rustlers. She had never told James about their threats, not wanting to burden him with more worry. But now she realized that their hatred had driven them to actual criminal behavior. "They confessed?" James asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sang like canaries once they realized they were facing prison time," Dalton confirmed. "Seems they thought if they could pressure Mrs. Mitchell into leaving, you'd come to your senses and find yourself a more traditional wife." The word traditional hung in the air like a curse, and Clara felt the familiar sting of being reduced to the color of her skin rather than the content of her character. But this time, she also felt something new, the satisfaction of seeing justice served against those who had tried to destroy her happiness. "What happens now?" Clara asked. Dalton tipped his hat respectfully. "They'll stand trial, Mrs. Mitchell. And I suspect they'll be spending some time in the territorial prison, thinking about the difference between disagreeing with someone's choices and breaking the law to force them to change." As the crowd began to disperse, Clara noticed something interesting. While some faces still showed disapproval of her marriage to James, others seemed thoughtful, even ashamed. The revelation that respected community leaders had stooped to criminal behavior had apparently caused some people to reconsider their own attitudes. Mrs. Henderson, the dress shop owner who had been one of Clara's employers in Amarillo, approached with hesitant steps. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said quietly, "I want you to know that not everyone in town supported what those men did. Some of us have been doing some thinking about what really matters." Clara studied the older woman's face, seeing genuine remorse in her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means more than you know. Would you, that is, if you ever need any sewing work done, or if you'd like to do some sewing for the shop, you'd be welcome." It was a small gesture, but Clara recognized it for what it was, a first step toward acceptance, or at least tolerance. She squeezed Mrs. Henderson's hand gently. "I appreciate that. I truly do." As they finally left Laredo behind and headed toward home, Clara reflected on the strange turns their wedding day had taken. They had begun as outcasts, celebrating their union in near isolation. But they were ending the day with at least some measure of justice served and a few minds possibly changed. "No regrets?" James asked, as they bounced over the familiar ruts in the road. Clara looked at her new husband, really looked at him in the fading light. His face showed the stress of the past few months, the lines around his eyes deeper than when they had first met. But it also showed something else: peace, contentment, and a love that had only grown stronger under pressure. "No regrets," she said firmly. "You?" "None whatsoever. Though, I have to ask, did anything happen at the ranch while I was chasing those rustlers? You've seemed different since then. Stronger, somehow." Clara considered telling him about Garrett's visit and threats, but decided the truth could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was their wedding night, and she didn't want it shadowed by talk of violence and hatred. "I learned something important that day," she said instead. "I learned that I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm building something. We're building something." James reached across the wagon seat and took her hand, his thumb tracing the new gold band on her finger. "What are we building, Mrs. Mitchell?" Clara smiled at the sound of her new name, feeling it settle around her like a warm cloak on a cold night. A life worth fighting for. A love worth defending. A future worth believing in. As they approached the ranch, Clara could see lights glowing in the windows of their home. Miguel had gone ahead to prepare a surprise lanterns hung from every post and beam, turning the entire ranch yard into a galaxy of warm, welcoming light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mitchell," James said, as he helped her down from the wagon. Clara looked around at the ranch that was now truly hers, the corrals, where she would learn to handle horses, the garden plot where she would grow vegetables and flowers, the house where she and James would build their family. It wasn't the life she had dreamed of as a young girl, but it was something better, a life she had chosen for herself, fought for, and won. "Welcome home," she agreed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they walked toward their house hand in hand, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate seamstress in Amarillo to the woman who had faced down armed men to protect what was hers, she had traveled not just across Texas, but across the entire landscape of her own courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did on the frontier. But tonight, Clara Mitchell was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the man she was meant to love, building exactly the life she was meant to live. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The doctor's hands shook as he closed his medical bag, his face pale as winter moonlight in the flickering lamplight of the Mitchell ranch house bedroom. Clara lay unconscious on the bed, her breathing shallow and labored, while James paced the floor like a caged wolf, his boots wearing a path in the wooden planks. Outside, a fierce December storm battered the windows with ice and wind, trapping them all inside with fear and desperation that felt thick enough to cut with a knife. "How long has she been like this?" Dr. Morrison asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold that seeped through every crack in the house. 3 days, James replied, his voice hoarse from worry and sleepless nights. "Started with a fever, then she collapsed yesterday morning while feeding the chickens. Miguel had to ride through the storm to fetch you." Clara stirred on the bed, her dark skin flushed with fever, her lips moving soundlessly, as if she were carrying on conversations with people only she could see. The sight of her so vulnerable, so unlike the strong woman who had faced down armed men and social hatred, made James feel helpless in a way that rustlers and prejudice never had. Dr. Morrison checked Clara's pulse again, his expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. As the only doctor within 50 miles of the ranch, he had seen everything from gunshot wounds to cholera outbreaks, but something about Clara's condition seemed to baffle him completely. "I'm going to be honest with you, James," the doctor said quietly. "I'm not sure what we're dealing with here. Her symptoms don't match anything in my experience." "What do you mean?" James stopped pacing, his heart clenching like a fist in his chest. "The fever pattern is unusual. Her breathing is labored, but her lungs sound clear, and she keeps slipping in and out of consciousness in ways that suggest—" Dr. Morrison trailed off, as if afraid to voice his suspicions. "Suggest what?" "Poisoning, possibly. Or some kind of infection I've never encountered before." James felt the blood drain from his face as the implications sank in. Poisoning? Who would poison Clara? Dr. Morrison shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but given the recent troubles you've had with certain elements in the community, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility." The bedroom door creaked open, and Miguel entered carrying a steaming cup of tea brewed from herbs Rosa had sent with him. His weathered face showed the same worry that plagued James, along with an anger that simmered just below the surface. "How is she, doctor?" Miguel asked, setting the cup on the bedside table. "Not good. I've given her what medicine I can, but, doctor," Morrison spread his hands in a gesture of defeat, "we need to keep her fever down and hope her body can fight off whatever this is." Miguel's jaw tightened as he looked down at Clara's still form. "Boss, there's something you need to know. Something I probably should have told you sooner." James turned toward his foreman, seeing something in Miguel's expression that made his stomach clench with new dread. "What is it?" 3 days ago, before Clara got sick, Buck Williams came by the house while you were out checking the south pasture. Said he had some medicine for stomach troubles that his grandmother used to make. Clara was feeling poorly that morning, just a little queasy, and she took some of his remedy. The words hit James like a physical blow. Buck Williams had never shown Clara anything but contempt and barely concealed hostility. The idea that he would suddenly offer her medicine was so unlikely that it immediately raised alarm bells in James's mind. "Where's Buck now?" James asked, his voice deadly quiet. "That's the thing, boss. He didn't show up for work yesterday or today. Tommy said he saw Buck riding toward town before dawn yesterday, like he was in a powerful hurry to be somewhere else." Dr. Morrison looked up from checking Clara's pulse again. "If someone deliberately poisoned her, we need to know what they used. Different poisons require different treatments." James felt rage building in his chest like a wildfire, hot and consuming and dangerous to everything in its path. Buck Williams had been trouble since the day he arrived at the ranch, bringing his Mississippi prejudices and his constant complaints about Clara's presence. But James had never imagined the young cowboy would stoop to attempted murder. "Miguel, saddle ranger," James commanded, reaching for his gun belt. "I'm going to town." "Boss, you can't leave Clara now," Miguel protested. "And that storm's getting worse. You won't make it 5 miles in this weather." As if to emphasize his point, the wind howled around the house with renewed fury, rattling the windows and sending ice pellets against the glass like bullets. The storm had been building for days, and now it was unleashing its full power on the Texas prairie. "Then, Buck has to wait," James said, though every fiber of his being wanted to ride out immediately and find the man who had hurt his wife. "But the moment this storm breaks, I'm going after him." Dr. Morrison packed his medical bag with grim efficiency. "I'll stay the night, James. If her condition changes, we might need to try more desperate measures." The next few hours passed like a nightmare of fever and delirium. Clara tossed and turned on the bed, sometimes calling out names from her past, sometimes speaking to people who existed only in her fevered imagination. James sat beside her, bathing her forehead with cool cloths, and whispering words of encouragement that he wasn't sure she could hear. Around midnight, Clara's eyes suddenly opened, focusing on James's face with startling clarity. "James?" she whispered, her voice weak but lucid. "I'm here, darling. How do you feel?" "Terrible. Like I've been trampled by a whole herd of cattle." Clara tried to sit up but fell back against the pillows, exhausted by the effort. "What happened to me?" James exchanged glances with Dr. Morrison, unsure how much to tell her in her weakened state. But Clara had always been strong enough to handle the truth, and she deserved to know what they suspected. "We think someone poisoned you," James said gently. "Buck Williams brought you some medicine 3 days ago, right before you got sick." Clara's eyes widened with understanding and anger. "That son of a—" She caught herself, remembering Dr. Morrison's presence. "That explains why it tasted so bitter. I thought it was just awful-tasting medicine." "Do you remember anything else about what he gave you?" Dr. Morrison asked, leaning forward with professional interest. Clara closed her eyes, thinking carefully. It was a dark liquid in a small bottle. He said it was for stomach troubles, made from some old family recipe. But there was something else. She paused, concentrating. "He seemed nervous, eager for me to take it right away, and he kept asking if I was sure James wouldn't be back soon." The details painted a picture of premeditation that made James's blood boil. Buck hadn't just acted in a moment of anger. He had planned this attack, choosing his timing carefully to ensure he wouldn't be discovered immediately. "That settles it," James said grimly. "As soon as this storm passes, I'm going after him." But Clara surprised him by reaching out and grasping his hand with more strength than he expected her to have. "No," she said firmly. "We go to the sheriff. We do this legally, properly. I won't have you becoming a killer because of me. Clara, he tried to murder you. And if you go after him with violence in your heart, you'll be no better than the men who tried to drive us apart with threats and intimidation." Clara's voice grew stronger as she spoke, the fire that had always defined her beginning to burn bright again. "We beat them by being better than they are. We beat Buck the same way." Dr. Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving at the ranch. "I think she's going to be fine, James. Anyone who can argue with that much passion is definitely on the mend." Over the next 2 days, as the storm finally blew itself out and Clara's strength gradually returned, James found himself marveling at his wife's resilience. Not just her physical recovery, which was remarkable enough, but her emotional strength in the face of what had been done to her. "Aren't you angry?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Clara wrapped in blankets and sipping Rosa's healing tea. "Furious," Clara admitted. "But anger without purpose is just destruction. Anger with purpose becomes justice." When Clara was strong enough to travel, they made the journey to Laredo together, accompanied by Miguel and Dr. Morrison as witnesses. Sheriff Dalton listened to their story with growing outrage, especially when Dr. Morrison explained the symptoms and their suspicions about the poison. "We found Buck Williams 3 days ago," Dalton revealed. "He was holed up in a saloon, drinking himself into oblivion and bragging to anyone who'd listen about teaching uppity folks their place." "Is he talking?" James asked. "Like a waterfall. Seems his conscience finally caught up with him. especially when he realized he might hang for attempted murder. Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying Clara with respect. He admits to putting something in that medicine, some kind of plant extract his grandmother used to use for getting rid of unwanted pregnancies. Figured it might make you sick enough to leave town. Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she realized how close she had come to death. The substance Buck had used wasn't just meant to make her sick, it was meant to cause internal damage that could have killed her. "Where is he now?" Clara asked. "Territorial prison awaiting trial." "And Mrs. Mitchell?" Dalton stood up, his expression serious. "I want you to know that this community owes you an apology. What happened to you should never have happened to anyone, and I'm ashamed that it took a near murder to make some folks realize how far their hatred had gone." As they prepared to leave the sheriff's office, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The fear that had haunted her since arriving in Texas, constant worry about acceptance and belonging, was finally beginning to fade. Not because everyone had suddenly embraced her, but because she had proven to herself that she could survive anything their hatred could dish out. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Mitchell?" James asked, offering her his arm. Clara looked around Laredo's main street, seeing the faces of people who were finally beginning to view her as a person rather than a problem. Some still showed disapproval, but others nodded respectfully or even offered tentative smiles. "More than ready," she replied, taking his arm with confidence. "We have a ranch to run and a life to build." As they walked toward their wagon, Clara realized that Buck Williams had given her something he never intended, the final proof that she belonged exactly where she was, with exactly the man she had chosen, building exactly the life she was meant to live. The morning sun painted the Mitchell ranch in shades of gold and promise as Clara stood on the front porch, watching her 5-year-old daughter Emma chase chickens around the yard, while their newborn son Samuel slept peacefully in her arms. 7 years had passed since she first arrived in Laredo as a mail-order bride. 7 years that had transformed not just her life, but the entire community around them. The ranch now sprawled across 1,500 acres. Their cattle herd had tripled in size, and their home had grown from a simple ranch house into a welcoming haven that served as the heart of their growing family. "Mama, look!" Emma called out, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward the porch with a handful of wildflowers. "I picked these for baby Sam." Clara smiled down at her daughter, marveling at how Emma had inherited the best qualities of both parents, James's determination and Clara's gentle strength, wrapped up in a package of pure joy that brightened every day. Emma had been born into a world that was slowly learning to accept mixed families, though the journey hadn't always been easy. "They're beautiful, sweetheart," Clara said, accepting the slightly wilted bouquet. "Why don't you put them in water for his room?" As Emma skipped into the house, Clara heard the sound of approaching horses. James rode into the yard with Miguel and 2 new ranch hands, their faces dusty from a morning spent checking the northern pastures. At 41, James had developed the weathered look of a successful rancher, his hair showing streaks of silver that made him even more distinguished than the young man who had first answered her letter. "How's our boy today?" James asked, dismounting and climbing the porch steps to peer down at Samuel's sleeping face. "Perfect, just like his daddy," Clara replied, leaning into James's embrace as he wrapped his arms around both her and the baby. James laughed, the sound carrying across the yard like music. "If he's anything like his mama, he'll be running this ranch by the time he's 10 years old." The sound of another horse approaching interrupted their moment of domestic bliss. Clara looked up to see a familiar figure riding toward them, Dr. Morrison, now showing his own signs of age but still serving as the only doctor for miles around. "Morning, folks," Dr. Morrison called out as he tied his horse to the hitching post. "Just wanted to check on our newest ranch hand and deliver some news from town." Clara invited him inside, where they settled in the expanded kitchen that now served as the true heart of their home. Emma immediately attached herself to Dr. Morrison, who had delivered her and held a special place in her young heart. "How's little Samuel doing?" the doctor asked, examining the baby with practiced hands. "Strong as an ox and twice as stubborn," Clara replied proudly, "just like his father." Dr. Morrison chuckled as he completed his examination. "He's perfect, Clara. You and James grow beautiful children. You mentioned news from town? James prompted, settling into his chair at the head of the kitchen table. Dr. Morrison's expression grew more serious. Several things, actually. First, the new school teacher arrived last week, a young woman from back east who seems very progressive in her thinking. She's already announced that all children will be welcome in her classroom, regardless of their background. Clara felt her heart lift with relief. Emma's education had been a constant worry, as the previous teacher had made it clear that mixed-race children weren't welcome in her classroom. Clara had been teaching Emma herself, but she knew her daughter needed the social interaction that only school could provide. That's wonderful news, Clara said. Emma will be so excited to finally attend school with other children. There's more, Dr. Morrison continued. The town council, the new one, since Garrett and his cronies went to prison, has officially invited you both to serve on the committee planning the annual Harvest Festival. They want the Mitchell Ranch to be one of the featured participants. James raised his eyebrows in surprise. The Harvest Festival was Laredo's biggest social event, drawing people from all over the county. Being invited to participate was a clear sign that their family had finally achieved full acceptance in the community. And the third piece of news? Clara asked, sensing there was more. Dr. Morrison smiled mysteriously. A letter arrived for you yesterday, from someone who says she's your cousin, visiting from New Orleans. She wants to come see the ranch and meet your family. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had lost touch with most of her family after leaving Louisiana, assuming that the war and its aftermath had scattered them to the winds. The idea that someone from her past wanted to reconnect filled her with excitement and nervous anticipation. Her name? Clara asked. Lucy Washington. Well, Lucy Dubois now. Says she married a merchant and they're doing quite well for themselves. She'd like to visit next month if it's convenient. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes as memories of her childhood flooded back. Lucy had been more like a sister than a cousin, the two girls growing up together on neighboring plantations before the war changed everything. The thought of seeing her again, of sharing her new life with someone who remembered the old one, felt like a gift beyond measure. That afternoon, as James worked with the ranch hands and Emma napped beside baby Samuel, Clara sat at her kitchen table, writing a response to Lucy's letter. She found herself struggling to find words that could capture the journey she had taken from desperate seamstress to mail-order bride to successful ranch wife and mother. Dear Lucy, she finally wrote, your letter brought such joy to my heart that I cried tears of happiness for the first time in years. Yes, please come visit us. I have so much to show you and so many stories to tell. You'll find that your cousin Clara has built quite a life for herself here in Texas, with a wonderful husband and two beautiful children who light up every day. I can't wait for you to meet them all. As she sealed the letter, Clara reflected on how much had changed since that desperate night when she first answered James's advertisement. The scared, lonely woman who had risked everything on a stranger's promise of a better life had become someone she barely recognized, confident, secure, surrounded by love and respect. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner in their expanded dining room, Clara shared Dr. Morrison's news with everyone. Emma clapped her hands with excitement about starting school, while James smiled at the invitation to participate in the Harvest Festival. Mama, will Cousin Lucy like our ranch? Emma asked, her young mind already planning ways to impress their upcoming visitor. I think she'll love it, sweetheart, Clara replied. But more importantly, she'll love seeing how happy we all are. Are we happy, Mama? Emma asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. Clara looked around the table at her family, James bouncing baby Samuel on his knee while discussing ranch business, Emma chattering about the flowers she wanted to plant in the garden, the warm light of home filling every corner of the room. Yes, baby girl, Clara said firmly. We are very, very happy. Later that night, after the children were asleep and James had gone to check on the horses one final time, Clara stood on the front porch looking out over their land. The moon cast silver light across the pastures, where their cattle grazed peacefully, and the night air carried the scent of growing things and the promise of tomorrow. She thought about the letter she had written to Lucy and all the things she hadn't been able to put into words. How could she explain the feeling of being valued for who she was, rather than judged for what she looked like? How could she describe the joy of watching her children grow up free from the limitations that had defined her own childhood? How could she convey the deep satisfaction of building something lasting with a man who saw her as an equal partner in every aspect of their life together? James emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her on the porch, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Mitchell," he murmured against her ear. "Just thinking about how far we've come," Clara replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real." "It's real," James assured her. "Every day with you is real, and every day is better than the last." Clara turned in his arms to face him, seeing in his eyes the same love and wonder that had sustained them through 7 years of challenges and triumphs. They had faced down hatred, survived poisoning attempts, built a successful business, raised beautiful children, and earned the respect of their community. But more than any of those achievements, they had proven that love could indeed triumph over prejudice when two people were willing to fight for what they believed in. "I love you, James Mitchell," Clara said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "And I love you, Clara Mitchell," he replied, "today, tomorrow, and for all the years to come." As they stood together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built with their own hands and hearts, Clara thought about the young woman who had once trembled while writing a letter to a stranger. That woman had been brave enough to hope, strong enough to endure, and wise enough to recognize love when it found her. She had answered a mail-order bride advertisement with nothing but faith and determination. In return, she had received everything she had ever dreamed of, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to step through a door that might lead anywhere, you discover it leads exactly where you were always meant to be.